The drops of rain fell softly onto Liam's bulletproof vest. He normally enjoyed the rain. It was a comforting sound that he would happily listen to after a late shift, while he fell asleep in his warm bed. But now, as he stood protected behind the brick wall of a warehouse, the raindrops seemed to penetrate loudly into his mind, when all he wanted was silence so that he could listen for the sound of footsteps. As a new rookie, fresh out of the Pennsylvania State Police Academy, this was Liam's first true armed call-out. He was not too worried about his ability to cope with the scene now playing out before him. He had been trained well enough and was top of his class at the shooting range. However, this was the first time he had been put into a situation where the suspect was not firing paint bullets in return. He was a little concerned that he had lost sight of his partner, who had disappeared around the other side of the abandoned warehouses and had not yet made contact over the radio. Liam peered cautiously around the corner of the building to see if the suspect was in view. The rain was heavy now and being pushed along by a steady wind. It made the outlook very hazy, and he could not see any form of person moving throughout his field of vision. He stood back against the wall and looked down at his Glock pistol, as drops of water dripped down his fingers and ran along the polymer of the trigger before dropping to the ground at his feet. He didn't realize that his hands were shaking, and he seemed surprised that they were. "I must be cold," he thought to himself. Surely it wasn't the nerves. He didn't feel nervous, although he could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Perhaps it was just the adrenaline pumping through my veins, he surmised. Either way, he wasn't going to let it make him lose focus. Before arriving at the position he now stood waiting, Liam and his partner had chased a stolen Chevy from the liquor store the suspect had just held up. The call that had come across the radio had said that the suspect was a male, Caucasian in his late teens, early 20s, wearing a dark blue hooded sweatshirt and jeans. He was armed and had shot and wounded the store owner. Now on foot, the suspect had them run the distance of 2 football fields in pursuit, after he had ditched the stolen vehicle in an alleyway a short time ago. Liam wasn't surprised that he was now feeling a bit hyped up. This moment was what he had been trained for, to get a dangerous criminal off the streets. Finally, a call came over the receiver. It was his partner, who stated that the suspect had been sighted and was heading in Liam's direction. He slowly took another look around the side of the building. There, in the rain, was not the dark figure of the young man in question, but in the hazy gray light from a nearby street lamp, Liam saw the silhouette of a young girl dressed in a white nightgown. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief. What was she doing there? The gunman was heading in her direction. Then, as Liam peered hard at her while wondering if he should run forward to get the child out of harm's way, she faded from sight, as if she had never been there in the first place. The rookie rubbed his eyes again. "Don't go gaga now," he thought to himself. He took another look at the same spot, but this time all he could see was a dark figure creeping along next to a fire escape of the abandoned building on the opposite side of the courtyard. The suspect pulled himself up and climbed a ladder, and disappeared through a door on the 3rd and top story of the warehouse. Liam quickly radioed in the whereabouts of their suspect, and he quickly began walking around the back of the building he had been sheltered behind, so he could follow the path the suspect had used without being detected. He had only gone a couple of steps when the ghostly figure of the girl dressed in white appeared ahead of him again. She looked at him this time with an expressionless face. Liam stopped in his tracks now, feeling a little unnerved by his second appearance of the apparition. However, just like the first time, she quickly faded from view. He shook his head, as if trying to clear it, and carried on walking forward into the oncoming rain and wind. Once he reached the end of the building, he looked around the corner to check if all was clear. It was then that he saw his partner for the first time since they had parted upon arriving at their location. Zach signaled to him that they should proceed towards the fire escape. While Zach covered him with his pistol aimed at the 3rd-story door, Liam quickly darted through the open space at the end of the courtyard to where his partner stood at the edge of the building the suspect had entered. They crept along slowly, staying close to the brickwork of the old warehouse. Liam had opted to go first and quickly wished that he had it, because standing once more in front of him at the bottom of the fire escape was the ghostly figure of the child. He turned to his partner and whispered quietly, "You see that at the bottom of the ladder?" "See what?" Zach whispered back, looking puzzled. "Never mind," Liam replied. He didn't want his partner to think he was going off the deep end. Thankfully, the apparition quickly faded again. Liam tried his best to be as quiet as he could while climbing the metal ladder. Not an easy feat with the gear upon his supply belt hitting the metal rungs with a resounding ping. Luckily enough, the suspect didn't make an appearance at the wrong time, and they both were soon standing on the landing of the top floor. The door stood slightly ajar, and after listening for any sound of movement inside, Zach quietly pulled it open, and so they could enter the abandoned premises. The blackness had an eerie calm about it, and the smell of old newspapers hit their nasals as both men cautiously advanced through the door. Suddenly, there was a noise at the other end of the large open warehouse, and several bullets hit the wall next to them as the suspect fired his handgun. Both officers dropped to the ground as the door banged loudly behind them. It appeared the light from the outside had given away their location to the suspect. Both officers returned fire, and they could see a door quickly open at the other end of the warehouse and the suspect darting through it. Zach got onto the radio to ask if their backup had arrived. The reply came back that the area outside was now surrounded. However, they were the only officers inside the building. Liam turned on his flashlight to survey their surroundings. There were 2 doors located at each end of the floor they were on, other than the fire exit they had just entered. Zach opted to follow the suspect's route, and he suggested Liam take the other exit in the hope they would corner the suspect on one of the floors below. As Liam slowly descended the stairs, he hoped that the ghostly image would not appear. She seemed harmless enough in appearance, but the sight of her unnerved him. He didn't have to open the door at the bottom of the stairs. It had been left fixed back by a hook on the wall. This floor had a lot of windows in it. From the light of the street lamp outside, Liam could see quite well the layout of the floor he was now on. It must have been the office space, as there were 5-foot-high cubicles spread throughout the room. He could hear a faint shuffling sound coming from behind one of the partitions not far from where he stood. He crept forward silently, holding his Glock firmly in front of him with his finger poised on the trigger. It didn't take him long to locate their suspect, who was crouched down frantically searching through a rucksack. He didn't notice that a police officer was now standing behind him until Liam loudly stated his presence and demanded that the man put his hands above his head and move away from the bag. The suspect stopped what he was doing. However, he made no attempt to do as he was just been ordered. "Do as you were told and move away from the bag. Backwards towards me with your hands in the air, or I will shoot. Do you understand?" Liam ordered in a harsh, demanding voice. The suspect started to turn slowly around towards Liam's direction, while placing one arm into the air and grappled around in his bag with the other. In that split second, Liam had to make a decision, and as much as it pained him to open fire, he let out a volley of shots. The man slumped forward on the floor with blood oozing from his wounds. At first, Liam couldn't move. He stood holding the Glock firmly in one hand while he pushed the receiver of his radio to let them know the suspect had been shot. Why hadn't the guy done as he'd been told? Everything would have been fine if he had listened to the command. As Liam stood there, pinned to the spot, he knew he had to keep his weapon positioned on the suspect until his partner could reach him. He could hear someone running toward his direction, and he assumed it was Zach. Then out of the corner of his eye, he spied the ghostly image of the young girl, and she was smiling at him. Although, just as she had done before, she faded from view quickly. Liam could feel his whole body shaking uncontrollably. For the first time that night, he didn't care that the apparition had shown herself. He was too focused on the limp body before him to worry about anything else. He kept on thinking that the suspect would get back up and fire at him at any moment. Zach finally showed up. It seemed like he had taken an eternity to arrive at the scene, while really it had not been more than a minute. He had his weapon in one hand and was carrying a Colt pistol in the other. "I found this on the stairwell," he said, holding up the other gun. "It's empty. I assume he discarded it, as he must have run out of ammo. Hold yourself in that position while I check him over for any other weapons." His partner cautiously rolled the suspect onto his back and felt for the carotid pulse on the man's neck. "He won't be shooting at us anymore," he said blankly. Liam lowered his pistol while Zach started to search the body for concealed weapons. "He's clean," he added, before then looking through the rucksack. All he found was a screwdriver, a worn leather wallet, a large pile of loose cash, and a bottle of Jack Daniels whiskey. "Shit, he was unarmed," Liam stated in total disbelief. He felt a cold, deep sense of regret engulf him like an Arctic winter at the sudden realization of what had just occurred. "Well, not totally unarmed, Liam. The screwdriver could have caused some damage if he had the opportunity to use it against you, Zach replied. I guess so, Liam answered faintly, not thinking for a minute that the screwdriver, which he assumed the suspect had for breaking into cars, would have been any competition to a Glock. From that moment, it didn't take long for the area to be swarming with police personnel. The chief walked up to Liam. You okay, son? He asked in a fatherly tone. It was then that the realization hit home for Liam. He had just killed a man. Of course he wasn't okay. He felt like shit. I've got to get out of here, sir, he answered hastily, as he felt his chest tightening. It felt as if all the air was being sucked out of him by some invisible force. He stumbled forward, heading for the door, but he didn't get very far before falling to his knees, gasping for the breath between giant sobs of grief that took of him like that of a broken man. The recent police shoots and public outcry were fresh in his mind as he tried to come to grips with the situation now being placed upon him. He didn't know the suspect was unarmed. He feared for his own life and that of his partner. The public wouldn't see it that way, though. His face would be in every paper throughout the country before long. But even that thought didn't pain him. As much as the loss of the young man's life, that was the thing that grieved him the most. Everything he had learned at the police academy meant nothing in that moment. He just wanted to hide his head away and hope that the whole messy incident would all disappear, just like the young ghost had done. He could feel hands taking his arms on both sides of his body and helping him stand to his feet. The police chief was standing next to him and said that he was taking Liam back to the precinct for a debrief. On the way back to the station, Liam sat in the front seat of the chief's car and silently watched the windshield wipers swishing back and forth. At first the chief remained silent, but after a time he began to speak. Officer Williams, I can read a lot into what you're thinking at this moment. I've been there a few times myself, and it's not a happy place. However, you have to realize that your main goal is to preserve life, whether it be your own or that of another law enforcement officer or member of the public. You do realize you will have to deal with this incident going through the media. It's just a shame that the media does not write articles about the job you had the other day, talking to that young girl and get her down off that bridge, or the guy that you took off the streets 2 hours later who was drunk so he could barely get his key into the ignition. I'd also like to remind you of a saying we use in law enforcement, and one that bears thinking about now. We would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. You took the right action, and I don't see that you will have a case to answer in this instance. When Liam didn't answer him, the chief carried on speaking. Officer Williams, I know the man you shot today very well. We have crossed paths many times over the years, since he was 16 years of age. If I remember correctly, he has had a hard life with no one to direct him on a right path. His father was a drunk, and he used to beat his son. We received a call to their house at least on 3 occasions when his dad took to the bottle and let his financial fractions out on his family. It all became too much for his son at age 18. We were called to the address once again, but this time it was for a hit and run. It appeared that the lady had finally had the strength to strike back at his father. He was told to leave the house and never come back. Sadly, his younger sister run after him, didn't hear a speeding car racing down the street. It was a sad sight to witness the young man cradling his dead sister in his arms as she lay there motionless, dressed in a white blood-stained nightgown. That was the last straw for the lad, and he took to the streets and a life of crime thereafter. Liam looked up at the chief in stunned silence. Now he understood who the apparition was. She had been the suspect's sister. 2 hours later, in the early hours of that morning, Liam sat up in his warm bed listening to the rain outside, flicking through YouTube on his tablet, in the hope of finding something calming to watch that would help him fall asleep. Just as he typed in the words, "help fall asleep," he spied 2 hazy white shadows at the end of his bed. They slowly came clearer, and soon he could make out the images of the young girl dressed in white and the suspect holding her hand. They were smiling at him, and although he was surprised to see them, he had a calm feeling wash over him, and he was not afraid. They kept smiling happily as they turned, and hand in hand they disappeared off into a bright light. Liam looked down at his tablet and hit search. There on the links looking up at him was a photo of a pretty girl smiling. The words next to the photo said, "The ASMR Sleep Clinic to help you fall asleep." He had no idea what ASMR stood for, but if it was going to help him fall asleep after the shift he had just had, he was willing to give it a try. The end.